Well, thanks for joining us this afternoon. It still feels a little bit like morning to me. It's been crazy, probably you guys too. Thanks for joining us. I know it's a small group, so we can keep things pretty informal. Please jump in at all times. We're here to answer your questions and provide you with as much information as we can in a short amount of time. My name is Amy Howie. I work with Project Success. It's a resource center here in Indiana, and I'm going to let our partner district, Fort Wayne, introduce themselves.
My name is Mary K. Mojgani. I'm a compliance specialist with Fort Wayne Community Schools.
I'm Deb Cook, and I teach functional skills in a middle school.
So who do we have in the audience? Are you guys teachers, teacher leaders? Yes? Some of each? Teachers? Special education, I'm assuming, do you work with kids with the most significant disabilities? Learning disabilities, kids on alternate diploma perhaps, or alternate assessment? Awesome, great. All right, well, just a little bit about Project Success. Have any of you heard of Project Success before? How many of you are from Indiana? Okay, good. So if you've heard of Project Success before, or if you've worked with us, this is going to be a bit of an overview, but for those of you who haven't, I just want to give a high-level summary of what we do. We are part of the Indiana Resource Network, which is a system of resource centers that work collaboratively. We are either completely or partially funded by the Department of Education in the Indiana Office of Special Ed. So they have a unique structure. We did actually a panel session earlier about how that structure works collaboratively, but we have a series of resource centers that are listed here on the screen that all focus on specific kind of niche areas. So for example, the InSource is our parent resource center, so they focus on working with parents and families. IEPRC, who is the host of these roundtables, do all things related to the IEP. They support the Indiana IEP technology, the IEP system we have in Indiana. They work on inclusive practices, MTSS. We work also closely with Patents that does all the assistive technology and accessible materials. ICTQ is a teacher quality SPDIG grant. Am I leaving it out? We have a Center for Disproportionality. Transition Center that does all things related to transition from K-12 to post-secondary. So we operate within this larger network of resource centers. Our focus at Project Success is all around things related to students with the most significant cognitive disabilities. So we came to be about 6.5, 7 years ago when Indiana, along with all of the other states, were making the shift from a really functional-based assessment, alternate assessment, to the academic skills-based achievement student response test. So did any of you go through that transition? Where you were assessing students on functional skills, maybe a teacher-rated scale, and then boom, a year later, students are responding, it's academic focus, and it's achievement, complete 180. All right, so Indiana, I think, was very forward-thinking in that they knew teachers were going to need support with that, not just in sort of understanding the assessment, but all the things related to that. How's the instruction changing? What do the standards look like? How do we lesson plan design lessons? How do we build collaborative groups and things like that? So that's been our focus over the last 6.5, 7 years. Our resource center web address is projectsuccessindiana.com, and so we'll refer to a lot of materials and resources that you can find on that resource center. If you haven't tapped into the web pages or the websites for all of those resource centers, I encourage you to do that. There's a vast amount of free information, resources, tools that are available on all of our websites. Just a glimpse of the numbers of what we do with Project Success. We offer a tiered approach to professional development, meaning we have universal supports that are available to everyone. We have lots of tools and templates and guidance documents that we've either created in collaboration with other EARNs or the Department of Education or internally that are pushed out on our website. We do webinars that are able to reach all areas of the state. We also do a lot of on-site technical assistance, so we'll go in and work with districts 2 or 3 or 4 times a year, whether it be on a PD day or a PLC time or release, whatever we can work into the district structures, we're able to go in and do that. We also do summer institutes, which have been really popular for teachers around the state. We get a lot of frequent flyers that look forward to it, largely because it's a time where teachers who all have a similar focus in the classroom are coming together and able to collaborate. So for those of you who work with kids with the most significant disabilities, how many of you have a partner teacher in your building? Some of you? None? How many of you are the only one in your building? Anyone the only one in your district? No? Okay, so a lot of places in Indiana, especially in the rural areas, there may be one teacher who serves kids with the most significant needs, K-12. So they literally are on an island of their own. They don't necessarily have time to collaborate with people who understand their world. So summer institutes are a great time to come and share resources and collaborate and kind of understand each other's perspectives on things. That doesn't mean there's not a lot of challenging and questioning and why do you do it that way and how that's not going to work with my kids because I have kids that are nonverbal. Well, my kids are nonverbal too, but it does work, and this is how and this is why. So lots of collaboration and idea gathering in the summer institutes. So those are the way we provide support. We also do classroom coaching. I didn't mention that. We've really gotten into that more this year with some of our model site schools where we're actually working with teachers and students coaching. The content that we cover in those sessions varies based on what the districts need. So the first couple of years we spent a lot of time working on mindset and understanding content connectors, which are our alternate standards, understanding standards. I know as a special education teacher myself, I had one class on teaching reading and one class on teaching math. And I was a licensed teacher. I could collect data, I could deal with behavior, I can write a compliant IEP. I didn't know how to teach reading. I didn't know how to break down a standard and design a lesson plan to teach reading to kids who have really significant needs. So we've spent a lot of time working with teachers just on what does it mean to break down a standard and design lessons. And then if you have kids who are still working on ground level, foundational level communication, how do you build that into? How do you build those social skills into the lesson? How do you follow up with those functional skills as an application rather than only teaching the functional skills? So kind of all of that whole continuum of instruction. We also have worked with a larger stakeholder group in Indiana to redesign the certificate of completion, which will likely become the alternate diploma in Indiana. So prior to last year, there was no state-driven guidelines on what a certificate of completion needed to look like. So every district was different. You can imagine, and I'll have to explain like what some of the problems with that were for parents, for schools, for the state, because the requirements were different everywhere. So we've been heavily involved in rolling out the new requirements for certificate of completion and working with high schools to figure out how to restructure their programs so that they can meet the requirements and still meet all of students' needs and communicate with parents and kind of all of the things that go into changes and the change process that has to take place. Goal writing, we've done some interesting work around goal writing, especially when it comes to related services and what does that look like and how do we align that to grade level standards, alternate standards. We collaborated with Patents, IEPRC, and the Transition Center to really think about that from all of our lenses so that we were putting out similar examples and similar processes so that there would be less confusion in the field. And then formative assessment. This is what we rolled naturally into talking about formative assessment when we talk about instruction. But we found, gen ed teachers aren't necessarily have a strong foundational understanding of what formative assessment is and how it integrates into instruction. So then we're talking about using formative assessment with kids who do not have reading skills or do not have language skills or are able to communicate in a consistent mode. So what does that look like and how do we share learning targets and how do we monitor progress? So we've been rolling out some work with formative assessment. And then the last thing that I want to mention is that we have done trainings this year. One of our deliverables for the state, one of the things that they asked us to include was training for paraprofessionals, which we are so excited to get that work out because we know that paras are responsible so often for the instruction of students, not just students with significant disabilities, but students with disabilities in general. We also know that there's very little training and background that they come with. And so, given some training and some basic skills, that could really have a huge impact on how they're working with kids. By the numbers here are just some of the numbers of people who have attended trainings. This slide does need updated. Probably the biggest thing to note is the views and downloads on our website. That's at 25,000 and 20,000. Probably 15 to 18,000 of those are just the content connectors, the alternate standards. We have some alignment documents that help teachers match up 3rd, 4th, 5th grade, K2, so that if they're teaching groups of students who are in multiple grade levels, they can pull standards that are similar in content so that they can plan instruction around that. So that's probably the main thing. There's also some, are any of you in NCSIC states? Still have the NCSIC assessment? I don't see anyone shaking their head. Okay, so when the alternate assessment came to be, the new alternate assessment, there were two consortiums. There were NCSIC and there were DLM. Anybody a DLM state? Okay, so there were those two consortiums, kind of like PARC and Smarter Balanced in the general assessment world. And so along with those two groups, Indiana originally was with NCSIC, but now have their own assessment. along with those two groups, lots of resources and materials came out. So some of the downloads on our website are probably some of those instructional materials that we've tweaked, but that actually started with materials designed to help support academic instruction for the assessment itself. All right. My colleagues tell me I speak quickly. I need to work on that. If I need to slow down, just... All right. Basically, I've already mentioned these, but I think as you hear from Deb and Mary Kay, you'll probably hear them talk about these things as well. Content connectors are the alternate standards in Indiana. So for example, if you're a DLM state, you probably refer to them as essential elements. If you're a NICSIC state, it's core content connectors. Some states just call them alternate standards, but the content connectors are the alternate standards in Indiana. They align to the Indiana academic standards. They highlight the knowledge and skills embedded, but are less complex in nature. We now have ELA, math, social studies, and science across the grade level. So this was a big undertaking. 2 summers ago, we began, or two, no, it was just last, I think it was just last summer actually. We wrote and revised this content connectors to make sure that we had the courses in high school and also social studies and science in non-assessed grades. So for whatever reason, there were never alternate standards in any grade that they were not being assessed, which if you think about it, makes absolutely no sense, because if we assess science in 4th grade and 6th grade, we need to also work on science in 5th grade. So we need the standards to know what to work on. So we now have a complete set along with courses for the high school that go along with the new certificate of completion. So that was really something I think that was needed to be done and has been very helpful to districts and to teachers to know what to teach. They are what drive instruction and what are assessed on IAM, which is Indiana's alternate assessment, and they're appropriate for students with significant disabilities. So this we have to say over and over and over, because sometimes we have teachers that grab a hold of them because the resource looks pretty, or they have some relationship to a curriculum materials that they like, or for whatever reason. They are not Indiana's academic standards. So if students do not have significant disabilities, they are not appropriate for them. Now, can it help to look at how they're broken down? Maybe, but we have to always be mindful that this really is for a 1% of the population that have the most significant disability. So just keep that in mind as we're going through the presentation. Some of the things that we have seen across the last 3 or 4 years, and I would say Fort Wayne is very much a part of several of these. When we did this slide for another presentation a couple of months ago, actually it was last summer, it was actually exciting to sit back and reflect and think, how can we capture what we're seeing across the state, and what are some of the reasons that keep us going and helping support work throughout the state. Probably the number one thing is we have seen an increase in expectations for all students. When we first had to make this shift, and I would love to hear from some of you later about this too, we had to first go in and make the shift, and we were talking about academic standards and a new assessment. It was like we had shields. We had to walk in with shields, because there's a lot of pull. Is it ethically, is it right? Does it make sense? But what about the functional skills? What about the feeding? What about the toileting? And never was it the case, yeah, we're still going to feed and toilet our kids. Those are pretty important things. But how can we also do academics? How can we build academics in explicitly and then use those functional skills as the application? And so it really pushed people in their thinking to think outside the box and really kind of have a leap of faith. With parents as well, we've had lots of conversations with parents that are very similar. But I can sit back after 5 years and being out in schools and having people tell me, oh my gosh, they're doing so much more than I ever thought they could. You have to share the symmetry story later. But those are the kind of stories, and you'll hear from her later, that over and over and over again we hear it. Now, are kids passing ACTs and going to college now? No, of course they're not. They have significant cognitive disabilities, but they are performing at a much higher level. And teachers are sort of energized by it too, because it's not the same things that they've always done. So that's been exciting. Communication has been a huge focus for us too. As we've increased academics, we harp all the time, students have to have a consistent mode of communication. We invite SLPs, any SLPs in the group? We invite SLPs to our trainings every single time. and gen ed teachers, but there's usually not any that show up. But the SLPs have played a critical role in this because they are able to, they just look at it from language from a different viewpoint. They just kind of have a unique perspective sometimes. And in some cases, they are actually the ones driving the academic instruction, which seems backwards, but wherever our entry point is, that's where we go. So that has been huge. We've worked a lot on core vocabulary and what that looks like and how you model and work with patents on AAC devices and things like that. So that's been a big focus. Just understanding the content connectors, how do you unpack them, how do you break them down, because they're still very difficult even though they're less complex. We've done a lot of curriculum mapping, either matching to what a district already has or creating their own form that makes sense. And then the certificate of completion, which I already mentioned. Okay, I think before we go into the questions, and I'm going to turn over the mic, do you have any general questions about the work of Project Success or kind of how we fit into Indiana? Is similar work happening in places that you are? Maybe? We'll get a chance to talk more later. Okay, so I'm going to start out, and I think I'll just let both of you start with these questions, and then we really would like this to be a collaborative discussion, so if you could either add to or ask follow-up questions, that would be fantastic. But basically, what is your role in supporting academic instructions for students with significant cognitive disabilities? What are the successes and challenges? And then let's save that specific professional development for last, but I think the first two can be kind of intertwined. So what's your role? How do you go about it? What are the successes and what are the challenges?
Okay, as a compliance specialist, I supervise the functional skills programs for our district, and we are the largest school district in the state, so we have about 150 students, functional skills students, just in high school, just on the certificate of completion. So overall, maybe about 400 students that are in functional skills. So when we were told by the state that things were going to be changing with certificate of completion, it was really a kind of daunting task for us because we're so large. And I think one of the things that we had to consider is that we've really taught, and at least at the high school level, we've had 4 areas. We've taught vocational training, independent living skills, functional math, and functional reading, and that's what we've been doing for years and years. And now you're asking us to make our classrooms look more like general ed, and people are going to be taking biology and geography and history of the world and all of these classes, and so it was a tough sell for administrators and principals to understand, and then of course it's a tough sell for teachers too, because they don't have that content knowledge, and so how are you expecting me to teach all these things without resources? So our partnership and relationship with Project Success has been amazing, and we wouldn't have been successful in doing any of the work that we've done so far without your help, so it was amazing. With our certificate of completion, we have a 4-year plan sort of mapped out for next year, so we have an idea of where students are going to start as incoming 9th graders. Can
you pull it up?
Sure. So this is what we have projected, and this could possibly change, but we for sure know that for our incoming freshmen next year, that they will all take Applied English 9 and Applied Algebra 1. We've got a history class, Geography and History of the World. Our applied prep for college and careers, that's going to be the vocational training piece. So I think one of the problems that we had this past year was that a lot of we have 2 big functional skills high schools with very large programs. One of them threw the baby out with the bathwater and just stopped doing all functional skills and decided that everyone was going to teach all academics. And so it really put a lot of pressure on teachers, because teachers all of a sudden had all of these prep areas for science and math and English and history, and they weren't used to teaching that, and they didn't have the resources to do it. So we kind of slowed the train down now, and we have tried to keep a balance of what is important. Why are these students in functional skills to begin with, so that we keep that at the forefront, that we do need to prepare them for adult life. So the basic skills development will capture some of the IEP goals and some of the functional math, like the time and the money, Applied prep for college and careers can capture some of the independent living things, the cooking classes that we had, but we're still going to focus on academics as well. So we kind of have a plan in place, and 99.9% we'll have to tweak it as we go along, but there are some exciting things happening, and my symmetry story is that last week I was in a case conference for a student that was probably on the lower end of a moderate cognitive disability, and before the case conference the parent pulled me aside and she was very unhappy with the fact that we're moving in this direction. She doesn't understand it. Why would my son need to know algebra or, study literature? Some of those questions were coming up. So, I did my best to explain that, it's coming down from the state and we're embracing this. And later in the case conference, when we got to present levels, and we asked the student, so tell us a little bit about what you're doing in math. And the student said, I'm learning about symmetry. And everybody just kind of stopped and looked around and like, And I just kind of looked at the parent and said, this is why we're pushing rigor at this level, because, it's exposure. It's not that they're going to master all these concepts, but they're going to be exposed, and we don't know how much your son or daughter is going to pick up. So it was kind of a nice way that just kind of an aha. Wish I would have had it on videotape, because that was amazing. But very hard work with changing over to this new certificate of completion requirements and help with project success. It's been phenomenal.
Well, she gives us some credit, but working in a large district, I think it's important to point out too just the fact that 150 students at the high school level with significant disabilities, that's a huge undertaking in the processes that you've had to go through, and thinking about, just as you mentioned when we were showing that 4-year guide, it will likely change. Like it's a good first draft. And also thinking back, and you mentioned this a little bit about how different your high schools already were, and thinking from a district level standpoint, how do we allow some autonomy, and keep the good things that are happening, but also bring some consistency to it. And I think, Fort Wayne's been very methodical and intentional about doing that, and I think that will, long term, that's really going to pay off. The certificate of completion in itself, in other places, has been less of a discussion because there are maybe one high school or two, but even with that, there's still a lot of thought around, okay, this is the time to make some changes. How do we really want this to work for kids? Which is exciting and a lot of hard work. Oh, did you have something else? Yeah.
Just one more. The other thing that's still challenging and we're still trying to figure out is that the students with more severe disabilities, because in our district, our functional life skills programs are separate. So if you have more of a severe and profound disability, it's a different life skills program. But how are those students going to meet the needs of those units for the certificate of completion? So we're still trying to wrap our head around that. So lots of more work to be done.
Yep. And that's when we come back to the instructional level too, and what it looks like for each student is going to be a little bit different, but getting everybody there is a challenge. Yep.
I mainly teach math in our middle school for our functional skills students, and so for the last couple of years I would choose certain standards, like we would do a unit on graphing or we would do a unit on fractions. And so this year Project Success has come in, and they're like, we need to look at all those content connectors, and we need to make a curriculum out of that. And at first it's very overwhelming when you look at how many content connectors there are, and where do you start, and how do you put that all together. And so in the past I would work on the functional skills 4 days a week, and I would do a standard 1 day a week. And so as we were meeting, Amy said, there's a lot. I think you're going to have to work on it 5 days a week to get everything in. And so people, my assistants, everybody's like, are you crazy? What are we doing? We can't do this, But it's been really fun, and we've been doing it 5 days a week, and that's not even enough. We could do it 10 days if we were in school 10 days a week and probably not get through everything. But I think the biggest thing is just to remember we're exposing them. It was hard for me to get away from mastery because I want to work on something till they know it and they can take it to someone else and they can do it and they make it, so mastery was a big issue for me. So just letting go of that, let's just expose them and see how far we can go with that. The students have had a wonderful time with that. They think it's very cool to be doing all these new activities, and whenever we can, we tie in the functional part of things. When we were dividing with remainders, we were buying food items, and so they would have to divide out their money and what's your remainder, and so then that was applied there for them to know that's what they did. And right now we just finished our unit on fractions, and so we're converting fractions to decimals, and we're like, oh wow, how are we going to bring that down to where they understand it? Well, so we started with money, and how many quarters in a dollar? Well, there's 4. And so then when we put up like pictures of our fractions, we put quarters on all of those sections, and they had to count that. Oh, well, there's 2/4, so that must be 50, and then tied that into percentages, and so making those connections. And it's been amazing to see. We use the actual vocabulary, so we use numerator, denominator. Equivalent was a big word. I don't know why the kids like that word so much, but that was a big word. And so when we started introducing other units, they would say, oh, I know, that's equivalent. So they really were excited that they would know that. And we've had people come into our classroom, administrators come in and they stand over the kids and they watch them, well, what are you doing? And, they can explain it to them. And so that's good that they're grasping that concept. We have been experimenting with assessments because some kids can take a paper pencil test, some cannot. And so how can we still assess that skill to know? We do still do paper pencil for some things. We'll just throw it out there, let's try this. But we've also found a lot of success in just the hands-on activities we normally would do in day-to-day activities. Then we present that as an assessment. An example for that would be we were adding positive and negative numbers on a number line. And so their assessment, they had like a flashcard that was saying -1 plus -2, and then they had a pile of answer cards. So they could figure that out, and then they had to match their problem card with their answer card, and then we just kept track right and wrong, and that was a really quick, easy assessment. But it wasn't so much like a test where they would freak out, oh no, it's a test, I'm going to do bad, so that was really nice to see that. We just did that also with adding fractions. So when we were working on that, we did a similar hands-on activity. So that was a very good, quick assessment that we could do. We've also worked with voting cards. So each student would give get their ABCD cards, and then we would present a question, and then we'd say, what is the answer? And they would hold up their voting cards. So that is a very quick assessment to do those, because you can just scan your class.
So a couple things to piggyback on that. First of all, Deb is a rock star, and her classroom is actually a model site. So she makes it seem like she was, she was very brave to jump out and do some of these things. And so for that, I have a lot of respect for that. Did you hear the way she combined the functional and the academic, and how it just flawlessly flowed from one to the other? That is not something that comes easily. That is something that we spend hours, and for Deb it does. It was just a natural thing. She puts lots of thought into it, and so lots of good examples. Also has a really good relationship with a gen ed teacher that also teaches math, so I think the concept and the content knowledge there is, she has someone to bounce those ideas off of. But that is something that is that we're trying to help teachers all over the state do, because it's important, right? It's important to be able to apply the skill, but if you don't ever teach it explicitly as a standard and a skill, and you don't assess it, like the way she was talking about assessing, you don't know if students can do it at all. So I think that was critical. The academic vocabulary piece continues to amaze me, and we have some other teachers that's kind of was their entry point to this academic instruction, was all right, I'll just throw out some vocabulary and put some on the wall. But as kids caught on, and as there was response to that, then we started introducing additional lessons into instruction. One of my favorite stories was there's a standard in language arts that explicitly states the implied meaning or something like that. I forget what the exact standard is. And the kid said, I know what that word is, explicit. Explicit, it's the thing on the CD and the games that if you're not supposed to play it. It's like, yes, That's the vocabulary word in a different context, but it's, I mean, the point is kids are being exposed to higher level academics. And then the other thing that I wanted to point out was I think you used the word overwhelmed when you see all the standards, and that's coming from someone who's very experienced, very dedicated, very committed, very hardworking, willing to take a chance, all of the things we want in a great teacher, overwhelmed. So we've had to be very conscious of that and take small steps, and sometimes we get really enthusiastic leaders who maybe have forgotten what it was like to actually be in the classroom. So creating safe spaces to say, you know, we're just going to start with ELA this year, and you know what, we're just going to do one grade to really unpack and think about instruction. I mean, we even course corrected a couple times on the way we were looking at standards, and we did it and we thought it was great, and then she got into teaching it and said, this isn't quite going to work. We need to go back to the drawing board. So having that safe space to be able to try something and then reflect and say, yeah, that wasn't quite right, let's try it a different way, is really important through the whole process. I mean, it's important in any change, but this is such a drastic change for teachers that I think it's important to note that.
One thing I would like to add to that, if you look at how the content connectors are aligned, and I have 6th, 7th, and 8th grade all in one class throughout the day. All of my classes are mixed grades. And so as we were looking at those content connectors, we were overwhelmed. And when you look at how they align, 6th grade was to divide multi-digit numbers, 7th grade was to add positive integers using a number line, and 8th grade was to solve real-world problems using 2 operations. And so I was like, do I do all of that in one class period? You know, like, should I call all my 6th graders up and teach one lesson, and now you go back to your desk, call my 7th graders up? And when it all really started to click for me was to just make a list of all the 6th grade standards that I use the IM blueprint, and I started looking at what standards, content connectors are covered on there, and I just made a list. And then they were, some you might find covered under computation, some of them were covered under number sense. So depending on the grade, it was covered in different areas. And so I couldn't really say, okay, for this month I'm going to teach computation, because that would mean multiple things through the 3 grades. And it really started to click when I made that list. And then I said, wow, all of these have to do with positive, negative numbers, or they deal with the number line. So then I would highlight those in one color. And then, wow, all of these have to do with fractions. So I would make a highlight, and it didn't matter what grade or which category it fell under, I would highlight that for fractions. And then that's how I started putting my units together, and then it just seems to flow because, you know, in 6th grade, positive, negative numbers, you're identifying numbers on that number line, you're plotting the numbers. Then you move into 7th grade where you're adding, you know, so it just kind of made an easy flow. So then it didn't seem overwhelming once I started patching them all together. If you look at them as individual documents, you're like, wow, you know, but then when you start pairing the skills together, then it wasn't as daunting of a task to separate them out.
And I think being able to break down those content connectors into skills is critical in that process too, because then you're able to match. We actually found a pretty flawed resource document that was we had on our website when we were doing some of the work, because the math wasn't matching up, and we're like, this isn't right. Then the numbers matched, but the content didn't match. So we had to go back on our own website and fix the alignment documents. This is an example of a this is kindergarten to 5th grade standard alignment document. So it's the vertical alignment. So you can see for kindergarten the 2.1 all the way through 5th grade. So this is to just show you an example of what she was talking about. She did it at the skill level, but at the standard level is if you're teaching reading literature 2.1, which has to do with using text to understand content loosely, that's the standard. You can see how it progresses through kindergarten through 5th grade. So you can tell that if you're designing a lesson and you've got kindergarten through 5th grade in the same class, and this is the standard, these are the standards that you're working on, you can see the progression of skills across the grade levels. This is just a helpful document. A lot of teachers find this document useful. And then what we've done, because these are all the standards, we've gone back, like Deb mentioned, with the blueprint. So those are the items most frequently assessed on the alternate assessment to sort of decide the starting point, because there's too many. There are just too many to jump in and teach all at once. So we've hit sort of, I guess, more bang for your buck with the ones that we know are going to be more frequently tested, but also someone has determined those to to be more important, or they would not be more frequently tested. So that's, just wanted to show you a visual of that. So I guess it would be a good time maybe to hear from the audience around the same couple of questions, like what is your role and where are you in supporting academics for students with significant disabilities? What are your successes? What are your challenges? It's advertised as a networking roundtable, so we're gonna have to chat.
Okay, I'm actually a professor at Millersville University. I teach a junior level class about inclusion of students with severe disabilities, and a senior level class, which is our methods codes for students with severe disabilities. So I teach people who are going to become teachers who might end up teaching in a life skills class or an autism support class. And I was interested in this because I've been, for this last year, put a literacy focus in my senior level class because we have 10 weeks of coursework and they have 5 weeks full-time in field. So there is not enough time to do. The first year I thought I was trying to do everything and this wasn't working, and I'm interested in trying to build that kind of embedding, giving them more practice to embed the functional skills while highlighting the academic and especially the literacy portion of it. And I think last semester I actually had 2 students who were in the field and was doing in a central program where they were just doing verbal behavior. They weren't doing any instruction at all, and they had success teaching these students sight words.
Yep.
Which is really good. And I think the challenge I'm having is just trying to fit everything in and get the culture around changing that, whole kind of sense of, these kids shouldn't be taught this.
So. That presumed competence.
Yeah.
Yep. Who else?
Anybody who's actually teaching?
So I teach math at the middle school level, currently in the mild, but moving towards intense. And so like right now, I'm in a school where just starting to do more inclusion, and like I'm a recent graduate, so this is my 3rd year of teaching, but in my college career, I went to school in Michigan and they're more geared towards full inclusion, and then I came into Indiana and it was kind of like I took a few years back in terms of law and everything, so I was like, okay, here we go. So I was a mild teacher and did a lot of pull-out. And we actually, in terms of our successes, so we had Project Success come in during December, I believe, and I reported back to my team and my future team teacher. I was like, hey, while you have these kids, before they go to the high school, you need to get them into pre-algebra. You need to get them into X, Y, and Z. And it's not because these kids couldn't communicate, it was because the teacher didn't think he could do that. And so I talked with my co-teacher and she was like, yeah, sure, bring him in. And they actually just both got 100 on the most recent assessment of grade level curriculum. Wow. It was adapted for the SPED students, so it was like fewer choices and things like that. But I should say accommodated, not adapted. But they both got 100 on it, and kids in the grade level gen ed were getting like 50%. So it was awesome to see. And then our kind of thing that we need more in our building is more like co-taught and inclusion training for the gen ed teachers, because I've got all these great ideas. I just I'm not assertive enough yet. And if they hear it from a young teacher, they're just like, psh, whatever.
Yeah. So I think both of you hit on a lot of good points. One thing that's happening specifically around the certificate of completion and helping gen ed teachers at the high school level understand that it's a modified credit. It's a unit. We're calling them units. They are modified. The curriculum is modified. The expectations are not the same. So like in saying that over and over, this light bulb's going off and teachers are saying, oh, so you mean you could take you could take it for no credit, or you could take it for pass-fail, or you could take it for a unit in the gen ed class, which has always been the case, right? You could have always been in that classroom, but for whatever reason, it's helping people understand a little bit more that, oh, so it's okay if kids don't all learn the same thing, if the expectations are different for a unit. So that's interesting. We haven't done as much work. IEPRC does a lot of work on inclusive practices. We have done a little bit of work in a couple of districts for kids with more significant needs, but as we've done academic work in general, that's a natural step because there's a common language. Gen ed teachers and special ed teachers now have standards to talk around. They have resources to match up. They can curriculum map up to the same standards and curriculum and content. So I think that those things are naturally happening because of the common language too. So, who else? If you guys could introduce yourselves and where you're from too, that'd be helpful.
My name is Kim Harden, and I'm from Eastern Illinois.
Okay.
I work for Eastern Illinois Area Special Ed, and this year we've just started a new program that serves moderate to severe. We combine with another school that had been part of the local district, but we kind of absorbed them, and so now we serve roughly 120 students from early ed through 21, and we have 2 buildings. One of them goes up through high school, and then the other building is for adult ed. And some of the successes, this is the first year with this program, some of the successes are with the adult ed is seeing a lot of improvement with social skills and just their work skills because they're getting a lot more opportunities than they had been previously. But the challenge is with our new program, we're really pushing for the functional skills more than we had been. And of course, we also have the expectation to have more rigorous academics, but it's a time management problem because the functional skills take more time, the community experiences take more time, and then we want to have the more rigorous academics, but they get the smaller portion of the day.
Yep.
So it's really been a challenge for us, and we use the unique curriculum, but it's just a balance problem that we're trying to figure out.
Yep, very good. Anybody else? Anybody else have anything to say? There's a couple of pictures and things I would like for you guys to explain. Do you think this would be a good time? Sure. Okay.
A lot of the questions we usually have in high school is around, okay, so we've been teaching Edmark survival signs and words and survival vocabulary. So what does a English 9 coursework look like, and how do we do that? So one of our high school's teachers teaches literature, and she has the students, a lot of them listen to the books on tape, or they may even watch the video of the book, depending on their cognitive level, but she has them do a PowerPoint, and they usually work in pairs, but it kind of covers a lot of the things that they would be learning on a regular 9th grade level literature class, where they would be talking about setting and plot and genre and character development, and they just do it in a different way. So this was a comparison of characters, and the students developed the PowerPoint, and it's at a level that they understand. So they can understand that by either watching it or listening to the story, that they can tell that a character is rude or mean or nice, or how they evolve and develop. They would have never been able to do that by reading the story, but they are able to do that through media. So that was one just application of how we teach some of the English 9 and 10 classes in our functional skills programs.
Do any of you use adapted texts with your students? Adapted texts. On our website, there's a link to another resource, and I think it's in the University of North Carolina, Charlotte maybe, that actually has probably 15 or 20 at least, all grade levels, texts that have already been adapted. So if the gen ed teachers are teaching, I don't know, throughout a novel, there you go. Then there may be the adapted version that would be similar to what she was showing. Some of them have picture support, but some of them do not.
For our PE credit, sometimes we have to get very creative, so we have a yoga class that's open to gen ed, so our functional skills students do join in their yoga class, and they really like it, and it's nice for them to have choices. There isn't a reason why they can't take, most of them can't take like a weight training class or a dance class, so just really opening up those electives to all students. And this is just a project that one of our high schools did where they were kind of trying to do that balanced project-based learning where they were learning to upholster. So they were upholstering all of the old benches and things that they used for bands, for drummers through the high schools. We're a big district, so we use a lot of these stools and they were in pretty bad shape. So using their functional math skills for the measurement and then actually learning the technique of using the upholstery guns to put the fabric on the stools. It was real purposeful. So just an example of how you can blend the basic functional life skills, vocational training in with the academic content. So they were very proud of their work.
Yeah, I think this is great too because it's an authentic experience. It's actual real work that was relevant and meaningful for the entire school. It wasn't, we're going to do this, assemble this plastic bolt here, and then I'm going to disassemble it, and then you're going to assemble it again. It's real work. Also involves the academic piece that she highlighted with the measuring, which is critical. Sometimes when we show things like this to teachers, they'll say, yeah, but my students couldn't use a staple gun. I don't want my own children using a staple gun probably, but there are always opportunities, however, for all students. So say you had a student and you really are working on foundational communication. Maybe they're choosing the fabric, this one or this one. They're making choices. Maybe they are rearranging or organizing or moving things. There's always places to integrate the students no matter what their ability level is, which is great with activities like this.
And this just happened this year where we were starting to integrate into the regular gen ed classes for biology and physics. So a lot of times when the teacher in functional skills is on a science unit, she will go and check with the gen ed teacher to find out when their labs are, and they will invite the students in for labs. They have peer support to help them with that. And so as we move next year to teaching, actually I think it's grade 10, we're going to teach our first biology class in functional skills. We will try to align things with what's going on in the gen ed classroom so we can have some of those shared lab experiences.
I think we have about 10 minutes left, is that right? Yeah, okay. So as we wrap up and think about the things that you've heard and sort of all of our unique perspectives from a leader, from a teacher, from a PD provider, what questions do you have? What's bouncing around in your head? What challenges do you think? What are your next steps? What can we do to help you find the resources?
I think I was looking for a little bit more. I'm at the very beginning at the elementary level, and we have a lot of families coming in with children in kindergarten, and before we can even get to the academic piece, we're trying to figure out communication apps. We're trying to figure out toileting, just being how to be a learner, how to follow routines, and things like that. So I think for me, I'm a teacher on special assignment, so I help all our integrated co-teach classrooms, general ed, special ed teacher all day long in Rochester, New York, and just thinking about how we can move that forward with the thinking, because it is an overwhelming task when parents who are rightly advocating for their children to be there, but thinking about all of those functional daily living skills, the communication piece, which is so important to put all of those components into place before we can even get to the academic piece, but the academic piece is still going on day one of school. So thinking about that, I'm just trying to connect, because there's been an awful lot of middle school, high school, but thinking about at the very beginning, because there's a lot of parents still grieving, may not having all of the I don't want to say classifications, but different diagnoses for their children.
And they don't know. They don't know what's the future.
And they don't know. And there's a lot of anger, frustration, sadness, and trying to help everyone move through that, really that grieving process before we can even get to all of this.
Yeah.
Because this is great, but we are so that foundation piece that takes years to build in the elementary level.
Well, and it's interesting because you could have said you were a middle school teacher and said almost the exact same thing, and we would have heard that as a question too, because we still have students who are working on those basic foundational, basic communication, behavior perhaps. Certainly, kids new to school with significant needs you're going to see that at a tremendous level in preschool. But one thing I would encourage you is instead of saying we have these set of skills we need before we get to academics, like integrate them, right? Like there are early learning foundations or the content connectors or the academic standards for kindergarten, first and second grade. And the good news is the gap isn't as big and that there's many more age appropriate resources in the early grades. But don't, try not to get too hung up on we have to do these 10 things before we can expose to the academic content, because what we found, especially with kids with communication, is once it clicks, they may be 8 years old, they may be 15 years old before we find that mode of communication that's going to work for them. And then if we haven't exposed to that academic content all the way through, they're so far behind. Whereas if we expose routinely, working on the communication all the time, modeling the communication all the time.
And that becomes the parent education piece at times too, because parents will say to you, I don't care about the academics. And so there's a lot of education that has to go on there too. And total agreement, but I think that there's sometimes some different unique medical needs in the beginning, because sometimes the kids are out at the nurse for a variety of health
they're losing
reasons.
instructional time,
They're
no doubt.
losing instructional time, and I'm not, please understand, I'm not trying to be negative in any way. I'm just getting from the teachers that I work with, these are their concerns. They love the kids. Everyone wants them to have that exposure. I love that the biggest thing is it's about exposure, not mastery. That is going to be my key component, taking back to them, just thinking about what it means to be at the very beginning of a child's academic career in school is overwhelming to some parents and a lot of educators.
Yeah, we've worked with our Parent Resource Center a lot because we have both, right? And then you're going to have this in the same classroom. You have a parent who says, at any age, I don't care if they can read, just teach them to feed themselves. And then you have a parent, same classroom, same level of ability, say, that's my job to teach them to feed themselves. You teach them to read. And so how do you balance that as a teacher and do both? And what is our role as educators? Where do those fit together? So it is very much a messaging, and it is very much about high expectations, both from the school and the home.
Absolutely.
And where they align or where they don't align. It's
and
different.
And just that constant conversation that academics and functional skills are all high expectations for both while they're at school every day. We want that.
We worked with one district that the educators could not get past the functional skills piece. Like they literally, we had been there 2 or 3 times, they could not get past the fact that kids needed to do this particular skill with money. I always call it counting paper pennies, because this was just the thing that they needed to do no matter what age they were. And we finally flipped it around, and instead of unpacking the standards, we backwards packed if you will, the functional skill. We said, walk it back. What are the academic things that help be able to do this functional skill? Okay, we've got those. Well, now let's go find the standard that aligns to that. And it was that almost backward process that it started clicking, like, oh, like nearly everything we call functional skill, there's some academic component to it. It's just figuring out where that is.
Add something on to yours. So before I went back for my doctorate, I was inclusive pre-K teacher.
There you go.
So I had typically developing kids, but I also had kids with sometimes really severe needs, so autism and so forth. And what I really found is, you do spend a lot with not only the kids with disabilities, but the regular kids and, getting them ready for learning. But I found the literacy, if I did some more of the literacy stuff, and maybe I adapted it for the kids, maybe if they couldn't communicate, they could point to a letter sound and stuff. and then that seemed to kind of jumpstart some of the other stuff.
Yep.
So, and this is what I'm trying to do with my students now. So that's just another perspective maybe, in which maybe they need the academic skills before they can do the functional skills.
It's about bringing your SLPs too, and your OTs.
they're all in there,
Yeah.
OTPs.
Sometimes that can really help too.
Oh, yeah.
All right, any other comments or questions for our Fort Wayne partners?
I think sometimes it's hard with teachers, you see that standard and that's what we have to meet. And it's hard to think, well, let's go back and unpack it. And what do we need? And even the very, very young kids, if you're not worried about the reading at this point, they're not ready for that, can they pick up a book? Can they hold it without tearing out the pages? That's all unpacking it back to do all of those things to get to the point where you can read a book. And sometimes, that seems like, oh, well, that's not an academic skill, but that is a skill that you need to get to that point. And that's an easy way, or when we're reading, can you look at the book? Do you know if the book is upside down, if it's right side up? And kind of those, things that we just kind of take for granted sometimes, that's, well, of course I'm going to point that out, or of course I'm going to have the book right side up or what, and make it kind of a fun thing for the kids to work through, and that's just part of working those baby steps up to the content connector that we're working on.
Do either of you have anything else to say in closing? No? All right, any last questions or thoughts or supports that we can provide? I encourage you to look at all of the Resource Network Center websites, because there's a lot of resources on all of them. All right, well, thanks for coming in. Enjoy the rest of your day. Safe travels home.